Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. In the last video we have discussed about private and public access specifiers, and I'll give you a small hint regarding the protected access specifier as well, which mostly use when we will deal with inheritance. So let's leave it for now. So in today's video what we are going to do, we will be discussing constructor. Okay, so let's first understand what is constructor. So as the name suggests, constructor is something which is used to construct something. So over here, what we can construct with a constructor is an object. What does that mean is we are creating an object and we are initializing it with the default values using constructor. Okay, so let's see constructor in action and then we will discuss it more. A small disclaimer, as I already told you, I'm also learning C++ and trying to implement the concepts that I learned using the SFML library. So it may possible that I may made some mistake. So please correct it out in the comment section. Thank you. So let's start by creating a class first. So I'm including the header files. I'm using a namespace, creating an entry point. So it's the basic skeleton of our program. Now let's create a class. So let's say uh, I want to create a class for student. So as we already discussed about private and public access specifiers. So here I'm using a private access specifiers. Why? Because we want to keep our data secure, right? So let's say a student can have multiple properties. For now, I am using only two properties. The first one is name. Let's say the first name is f underscore name, and a student must have some roll number. So for that, I'm using integer roll number. Okay, and we have public access specifiers, which means that we can access all the variables and functions defined in the public access specifiers outside the class using class object. We cannot access them without the class object, but yes, we can access them with the class object outside the class as well. So let's say I'm creating a function void function that will set a name. Okay, and this function will accept a string. Let's name it as name. So it's a formal argument, it's not an actual argument. And what will it do? It will set the first name, that is our actual variable or actual property of student, to name. What does it mean? The name will copied in fname, and as the name in a function, which means it is in local scope. So this name variable will destroy once the working of this function will be completed. Okay. Similarly, let's say we want to set the roll number. So we can do that in the same manner. And it will accept an integer, let's say roll number RL, and the value of RLL will be assigned to our roll number. So now we have done with the basic of setters. Now we need something called getters. What getters do? Getters will return the values. So now, as you already know, that the variables in the private access specifiers cannot be directly accessed from outside the class. Hence, we need some way in which we can print their values. Okay, so for that, I am creating one another function, or let's say single function that will print out the details of our student. I'm naming it as print detail. Okay, now what should be the type of our function? We can do it in multiple way. Either we can return some values or we can just use a void. So I'm using void for now. And one more thing that we can do is we can use the const keyword. We will discuss what const keyword is, but for now, const stand for something called constant, or which cannot make any changes. Okay. In this print detail, what we can do, we can print the details of our student by f name and the roll number and a new line. So with that, you see, our class is completed. Now we just need to test it out. So for that, I am creating an object of type student and naming it as s1. In this s1, I am calling a method called setName and passing a string. Let name it as rock, and s1 dot set roll number, and name, let the roll number be 10, and we just have to print the details using s1 dot print details. Got it? Just give me a moment, guys. Thank you for staying connected. Okay, so now you see we have the first thing. We done with the setters and getters. Now, what will be the output? Let's say if I run this program, I should get rock, and I mean the name and the roll number in this format. Okay, so let me try to run this. So you see now we are getting rock, the name and the roll number. So this is the basic. Like we already discussed it uh, in the previous discussion, not a lecture. So I think we are pretty clear with the public and private, what they are and what they can do. Let's do one thing. Instead of calling this functions, what I can do, let me just simply call the fname in the let me simply call the print detail function and see what will happen. Will it give us any error or any warning? Let's run it and see. So see, we are getting some, you know, kind of big integer and don't know what the value of what is this value, right? So this can be troublesome when we will work in the actual project or in our actual project. So we should need a way in which we can construct an object by providing a default values without calling any function, right? Because it may happen that I am not calling this function. So it can be possible that we will get some garbage value. So what we can do for that, to initializing the state or to initialize the state of our object, which is s1 here, we have something called constructor. What constructor will do? It will initialize the object. Now let's see how the constructor can initialize the object. First thing first, constructor should have the same name of what? Same name of class. So constructor should have the same name of our class. So it should have name called student, and we declare and define constructor in the same manner as we do our functions. So here, our constructor. This is our constructor. But there is one catch, or we can say there is two catch with constructor. There are two catches within constructor. First, it should have the same name of our class. Second, it should not return anything or any value, which means that constructor should not have any return type, as we do have in functions. Like here, void is a return type. Like void means it is not returning anything. Let's say I want to create a new function. Okay, name it as get roll number. What will it do? This function simply return the roll number. So as it is returning a roll number and roll number is of type integer, then this function should have a return type of integer, right? If this function will return a string, then this function should have the return type of string. Now you see over here we are returning a roll number. So let me uncomment this first, and let's say I don't want to print all details. I just want the roll number on my output screen. So I call this function, right? But as it is returning something, but we are not collecting it anywhere. So what we can do, either we can create an integer of type, a variable of type integer, and then collect the value written by this function in that variable, or we can simply see out the return values on our console. So let me try to run it and we'll see what will be the output over here. See, it is giving us 10. So I think it's clear what is return types or what are return types. Now back to constructor. Now as we see just few moments ago, what will happen if I comment out these two functions? It will give us a garbage value. Now those garbage value can be troublesome. So what we need a way in which we can set a value, or we can initialize a constructor. Just a second, guys. So in order to initialize our object, we need something called constructor, and constructor should have the same name of our class, and it should not return any value, and constructor should not have any return type because it is not returning anything, and it should be defined in the public scope. These are the few properties of the constructor, and one more property is that construct we do not need to call it. What will happen? The compiler will call it by itself. So let's say in the constructor, what I'm doing, I'm simply printing a statement called I am in constructor with a new line. Okay, and see, I'm commenting out this print detail function as well. So if you see in our main function, what we only have a object of type student and a return 0. Like we simply have one statement. So what will be the output? Will we see some garbage value or will have something else? So the first thing is that we will not see any garbage value because we are not using print detail function anymore. So what will be the output? Will it be a blank screen or something else? Let's see. See, we got a print statement or we got a C out over here. I am in constructor, which means that compiler implicitly or the compiler called the constructor with itself. Like we don't need to call it by ourselves. See, compiler called it constructor. So that's why it should be in public scope. What will happen if I will define it in the private scope? I think we should get an error. Let's see. See, we are getting an error. Student is private within the context. What the error is saying, that is saying the same. It's private within a context, which means that the compiler cannot call this constructor anymore. And this is what creating the error. Okay, so this states that our constructor should be in the public scope so that we can call it, and we don't need any object. We don't need to call it explicitly, or we don't need to call it explicit. Like it can call by itself by the compiler. So we can use this to initialize our object. How can we use this? Let's say I want to use this print detail function once again, and if I run it, I'm getting a garbage value. But instead of this, what I can do, I can set f name to default and the roll number be 0. So now if I run this print detail, what will happen? The compiler will see that the object is created of type student. First, it will call the constructor without calling any function or without anything. It will call the constructor first and it will run the coding which is given inside the constructor and will apply these changes to our private variables here, and then it will move rest of the coding. So my guess is our output should be I'm in constructor, the new line, and default and 0 here. So the output is same. I am in constructor, default 0. So now we are not getting any garbage values, right? So we can use this type of things, like we can use constructor in order to initialize our object. Now we have multiple type of constructors. Let's discuss them. First one is default constructor. Another one is parameterized constructor. So as the name suggests, default is the default one, like in which we are not providing any values or anything, which is not accepting any arguments. And one more thing that I need to tell is that it's not like we need uh, it's not like we have to define the constructor every time. What will happen if we will not define a constructor in our public scope? A compiler will create a constructor by itself. So that means Whenever we create an object, constructor will be called, whether we will define it or not. If we will define it, the compiler will use the constructor that we have defined. If we will not define it, the compiler will create a constructor and call that constructor. Okay, so we have something called destructor as well, uh, that we will discuss later. But for now, let's work with constructor. We have one more type of constructor which is called copy constructor, and as and we will discuss it later when it will be required, because it is a bit complicated to understand, not understand, to discuss. Okay, so let's work with another type of constructor. We can define any much, we can define as many as constructor we want, but there are few rules that we keep in our mind. First one, no two constructor can have the same, what we call definition, right? We cannot define one more constructor with the same name. Like, we need to use the same name, but we cannot define it like this. Why? Because if you see, it is not accepting any arguments, and this one is also not accepting any arguments. So it may happen, it will create a conflict. Let's try to run it. I'm in constructor 2 this time. Okay, let me try to run the program and see what will be the error, or will it run without any error. See, we are getting an error. We overloaded the constructor without passing any arguments in it. So it means we cannot define the constructor with the same definition or with the same declaration. And if we will not define any constructor, the compiler will create a constructor for us. Now let's see what is parameterized constructor. As the name suggests, these constructor will accept some kind of parameters. So you see, the first one is here, student, and the another one is here. Let's make it a parameterized. We want two types of parameter to initialize our object. The first one is string. So I am creating string and accepting a passed argument in a variable called name, and an integer for roll number, and let's name it as R. Okay, what we will do now, we will come in the body. Okay, Aja. We will come in the body and set the first name to name and the roll number to R. Let's do it RL. Okay, and let me comment this out. Let me no, let not comment this out. Parameter constructor. So let's run it. No error. Okay, so instead of writing constructor, let's write I am default. Now you see, if I create one more object called s2, okay, like this, what will happen? The constructor, the compiler will call the constructor two times. Why is that? Because we have two objects. When, as I said earlier, whenever we create the object, compiler will call the constructor. So if we create 10 objects, the constructor will be called 10 times. If we create one object, the constructor will be called only once. If we create 10 objects, or let's say 5 objects, the constructor will be called 5 times. So now if I run this, you will see I am in default constructor, I am a default constructor, default 0, default 0. Okay. So what happened there? You must be wondering why the why the output was like I am default constructor, I am default constructor. So it is because first we created the object, compiler called the constructor, and in the constructor we initialize the object. However, we are not printing it, we just initialized, we printed the statement. So I got I'm a default constructor. For second object, it print this statement and initialize the object. Now we using print details. So what will happen? The object will call the function called print detail, and it will print the variable's value for this object only. So as we discussed uh, in the previous video, that object is just a memory block in our memory, and that block will have everything that we define in our class, variables, function, everything. Okay. Now you see, it is very like it is very it is not very helpful to give the default value for default 0. What happen if we want to assign the value at the time of creating an object? In that case, our parameterized constructor come in picture. So what will happen? Let's say I'm creating an object s1 and I'm passing few values. So let's say the first value will be same name, which is rock. Okay, and the roll number will be 10. So what should be our output now? Our output should be like I'm in constructor 2, parameter constructor, then I am in a default constructor, then rock 10, then default 0. Here you go. So this is our output. So what happened over here? Now when compiler see that when compiler came to this line, it see that the object is created by passing arguments. It will call the constructor. As we already discussed, whenever the object will be created, the constructor will be called. It will call the constructor and it will match, it will match which constructor to be called on the basis of these parameters. Now we are passing only two parameters, so it will match. Like this one is the first constructor, it is not accepting any student, so we don't need to call it for this object. Now come to the second constructor, yeah, it is accepting two variables, and the type of variable is in the same manner, and are the types of variables are in the same manner, and the types and the data types of those variables are in the same manner, and we are passing the arguments in the same manner as well. So for example, we are first passing string, then we are passing integer. So the coding is matching. What will it do? It will call this constructor, it will print out the statement, and it will return, and it will initialize the object. So this is what default and parameterized constructors are. Okay, so let's do it one more time. It's kind of short exercise. I believe you will not mind if we will do this exercise for now. So, okay, so we all know the output for now. The output would be I am in the constructor 2, parameter constructor, rock 10. What will happen if I will create one more object like this? Student S, S2. You need to decide which constructor will be called. Okay, student S3, and let's say I'm passing few arguments. Let the name say it. What would be the name? Cherry, and the roll number, let's say 11 or 12, and I'm passing one more argument here. Let's say age be 15. Okay, so now I have created three constructors. You need to first you need to guess which constructor will be called. So for S2, if your guess is default constructor, then you are right. And for S3, if your guess is the parameter constructor that we have created, then you are wrong. And for S3, S1, if your guess is parameter constructor that we have created, then you are right. Why? Why this statement is wrong? Because if you see, when the object is created, the constructor will be called. But for the constructor coding, we are passing three arguments: a name of type string, an integer, and an integer. But we don't have that type of constructor in our public access specifier body. Like we have only two type of constructor. The first one without any arguments and the second one with only two arguments. So we should get an error. Let's try to run it. Okay, so we are getting an error. No matching function for call to student constant char 7 integer integer. This is the error that we are getting for now. Right? What will happen? It will the compiler will see this line and will check and will try to match the constructor which can accept three arguments in the same manner, but it will not see this because it is not defined, so it will throw an error. And one more thing that I need to add: whenever we create a constructor, compiler will not create any default constructor. Okay, so with that, what do I mean? Let's say I am commenting this out. Okay, so now for now we don't have any default constructor. So we should get an error at this line as well, because now we have explicitly created a constructor, so compiler will not create any constructor for us. If we will not create any type of constructor, not a default, not a parameterized, not a copy, then the compiler will definitely create a default constructor for us. However, there is one exception with the copy constructor. It doesn't even matter whether we create it or not, compiler will create it for ourselves. Okay, so if I try to run this, we should get an error with this line which says no matching function call for student, and we should get an error for 58 as well over here. No matching function call to student constant um, character integer. Okay, so I believe we have discussed almost everything regarding constructor. So if you guys have any error, you can ask in the comment section. And if you need a detailed video on this constructor, what you can do, you can refer to to the channel named mysurgy.com on the YouTube, and you can check the C++ series of that channel. It will describe you everything in detail regarding the constructor. Okay, so that's all. Thank you, and kindly like and subscribe. It's only 31 subscriber, and it's my third video, so kindly subscribe it. Okay guys, thank you.